So
Can we start?
this will be recorded, and it will be made available on our website and other websites for later viewing by others. We sent, before this took place, we sent a questionnaire to the candidates. They've submitted answers to the questionnaire, and we will put those on our website. But the questions we're asking them will be coming from those particular questionnaires. We're asking everyone to limit their answers to a minute. We have a timer that we will put on. The idea is for you all to get to know these candidates, get to know them in a little bit of detail, and also to keep moving. We don't want to dwell. We don't want to get into a lot of arguments. We just want to keep this program light and moving so that everyone has a chance to get to know the candidates. If you in the audience have questions, please put them into the chat, and then Andrea and I will ask as many questions as we have time to do. So without any further delay, let's introduce the candidates, and you will have a minute to introduce yourselves.
Okay, so I'm going to call on people so that we're not all trying to speak over each other. I am going to set the timer for 1 minute. I'm going to do it in the order that I believe people responded to this invitation. I think that's the order I sent it in before. So that's Reverend Wendy, Ankit, Franklin, and Eugene. And so in that order, please, 1 minute to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much, Andrea. Good evening, DC. I am Reverend Wendy Hamilton. I am a ANC commissioner in the Great Ward 8. I always want to start with that. I'm very proud of being a resident of the Great Ward 8. I am a mother, I'm a minister, I'm a new grandmama, and I am somebody who I believe is the best candidate for the shadow senator role. I have been an activist in the statehood community for many years. I have worked collectively with the Democratic Party, the DC Statehood Caucus, Hands Off DC, and other organizations doing great work around statehood. I believe the 700,000 residents of DC deserve honest, real, authentic representation. I believe that I bring that, and I bring that from a space of being a resident here and getting to know this city, coming to love this city, and understanding what we deserve in representation. I believe I'll bring that.
Thank you so much, Reverend Wendy. And also exactly 1 minute. Well done. Ankit Jain, I believe you are next.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for being here. And I'm so glad to see both so many faces, new and old, on the Zoom today. So my name is Ankit Jain. I'm a Ward 2 resident. I'm a voting rights attorney with Fair Vote. And formerly, before that, I worked for the Sierra Club for 4 years. So I'm running for this position because it's an outgrowth of everything I believe in. I'm someone who truly believes in the power of democracy. And I know that all of us here are denied that right that every other American citizen gets. So I'm running because I want to make sure that we get DC statehood, that we stop Congress from trying to interfere with our local rights, and because I have the vision for what this position can do, and I have the experience to get things done. You know, I have a clear idea of what we can do here and bring a fresh perspective to this position. And at the same time, I have the legislative advocacy experience we need from our chief advocate before the U.S. Senate. And I'm also, just a fun fact, I don't own a car. I'm a biker. I'm a Metro super user, and I'm excited to fight for federal funding for Metro. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, can I see one more? Kinlow.
Thank you so much, Ankit. Next up, we have Franklin Garcia. 1 minute to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea and Jean, for hosting. My name is Franklin Garcia. I have been in DC since 1981, a resident of Ward 5 for the last 15 years. Excited to be able to participate in this process. I got started in statehood back when I was an undergraduate at George Washington University, when then Senator Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. wanted to run for our first position in the city as a state senator, a shadow senator, and he invited me to join his campaign. And so I got excited about that. And since then, I've not only been able to have gotten involved in the statehood movement, but also empowering basically people who have no voice. I've been a shadow member of Congress, and so I bring a lot of experience by working directly with members of Congress, formulating a media campaign, and of course, working with other groups to make sure that we achieve statehood and take out the shadow name from our title. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Last up, Eugene Kinlow, please introduce yourself in 1 minute.
Hi, first of all, I want to thank the organizers. The Democratic State Committee has been instrumental in building momentum on this issue and awareness in Washington, D.C. and beyond. So thank you. I'm Eugene DeWitt Kinlow, a native Washingtonian. I reside in the 8th Ward, and I've been a part of this issue since I was a kid. I was first introduced to it by my father, who I witnessed being at a protest down at the Potomac River, dressed up like a Native American throwing tea in. Something that I'm sure he thought he could solve before we were of age. This is an issue that has been a generational issue. So I am involved, and I have been involved for most of my life. I've spent 8 years with DC Vote, where we organized protests, did government affairs interventions, meeting with our elected officials to convince them about the rightness of us being a state. I've worked for the mayor for the last 8 years, where I directed the Office of Federal and Regional Affairs, which has the statehood office in its portfolio. We can do more. We can attain statehood one day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I see this question start rolling in on the chat. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions from the list that we shared out earlier to the candidates. And then Jim, maybe you can help us intersperse with some of the questions from the chat to keep it lively and interactive. And so I'm going to start asking questions just to not put the same people on the spot to be the first to answer every time. I'm just going to shift everybody over by one. And so it'll be Ankit, Franklin, Eugene, and Reverend Wendy this time. We'll keep that moving. So everybody gets to be in the hot seat, eventually. The next question. There is often confusion or ignorance about the so-called shadow delegation's responsibilities and what you can actually do as the U.S. shadow senator. Sometimes there's even disagreement around what to call this role. Please summarize for us what you see as the scope of this role. Ankit, starting with you.
Yeah, thank you. That's always the first question I get. So glad we're addressing it at the top of the event. So, we are the main advocates for statehood before the U.S. Senate, the shadow senators. We don't have that vote in Congress, but we are committed advocates and leaders of the statehood movement. So there's a few things that are involved there. First of all, this is a position that organizes the campaigns to fight for statehood and defend our rights, at least on the Senate side. And then we're the people who take the meetings with the senators and their staff to get what we want out of Congress. And we're the ones who are really making the pitch to them to support statehood, to oppose bills that are really taking away our rights. And then, we're the ones who lead the messaging and the strategy on the Senate side to make sure that we have the best arguments before Congress about why they should do what we need out of them. And that's so important because you can tell the impact a good campaign makes versus a bad campaign getting what you want out of Congress. I've seen it many times in my life, and this is the person who organizes the campaigns and makes sure we're good ones. So that's a position.
Thank you. Franklin, your take on the scope of the role of the U.S. shadow senator.
Thank you so much. Yeah, shadow members of Congress were elected dating back to basically the birth of our nation. If you go back and you look at history, you see that the Southwest Incorporated Territory first elected members of the shadow congressional delegation back in 1796. And the idea behind that was that these incorporated territories wanted to send the message that they were ready to become a state. And so as part of that, they met a number of conditions. And one of them was to elect their shadow delegations. In a practical way here in DC, when we talk about shadow members of Congress, there are two basic functions that we see. One is to let the world know that we in the District of Columbia are in compliance with a plan to become a state. And that's why we have a shadow name associated with our position. It lets people know that it's a visibility title, that it lets people know that we are ready to become a state. And the other part of it is that we need to continue be the voice that carries the message in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. Eugene Kinlow, the scope of the role that you are running for, 1 minute.
All right, and I think Franklin mentioned the history behind it, but First, we don't really like the name shadow in Washington, D.C., but we will use it and we will take it. But we realize that behind that shadow, there is substance. As I see it, there's two roles for the position. One is, of course, to represent the interests of Washington, D.C., in as many conversations as you can have with your Senate colleagues. The second piece is probably even more critical, which is to educate and to advocate for DC statehood out in the states. Those senators that you'll meet with on the Hill, your job is to be out in the states meeting with their constituents to convince them that they need to support DC statehood. The bigger bulk of the work is trying to convince the nation that they should be supportive so that we can get the bill passed in the House or the Senate and that the president would sign it eventually. So that means the person has to actually be out within the 50 states.
Thank you so much. Let me just let one more person in and figure out how to restart the timer, which is, there we go. Reverend Wendy, 1 minute on the roll.
Yes, well, I think that the shadow senator role, first and foremost, is the ambassador for statehood. But I believe that role is on the Hill as well as in the city. The first question I get multiple times on the campaign trail is the what role and what does it do? And these are DC voters. And I feel like as much as we owe to the country in terms of educating them about what statehood means and the benefits and why we deserve to be represented because of the taxes that we pay and because of the fact that it is unconstitutional not to give us statehood. I also feel that there is a scope that can be expanded on this role that brings in the city, that educates DC residents even more. Lots of folks east of the river are a bit skeptical still about statehood. They ask me, Reverend Wendy, how's statehood going to put groceries on my table? I respect that. We need to build that bridge for DC and the country. I think that shadow senator role can do it. I want to elevate it to that.
Thank you. And since I started a little bit late, I gave you the extra 5 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question from the list, and then Jim, if you want to take it, I know there's a couple questions in the chat waiting. The next question would be, I'm going to ask the question, and I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper because each of the candidates did fill out a questionnaire ahead of time. You have the links to all of their very detailed responses in the newsletter that we send. We'll recirculate it again, including after this with Eugene Kinlow's responses as well, so that you all have more in writing on some of these questions and their take. The next question is, what are the top 3 actions that you are most proud of having already taken for statehood, and here's the kicker, over the last 2 years? And we're asking it specifically within this window because there is a very long history of a fight for statehood. But if you're thinking about somebody who's going to fight for you now, I think the more recent actions might have more weight. So if you could, let's see, it's Franklin who is starting this time. The top 3 actions you're most proud of in the last 3 years, and maybe why you're proud of them. 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think they're related to the actions I've taken overall. And the first one is I've always been engaged in Congress. Even though I'm no longer the U.S. Shadow Representative, I continue to be engaged, whether it's through their annual conference, leadership conference, or the galas they have. I continue to engage members of Congress constantly. I think that one of the things that I did when I got elected was to have a structured way to be in the face of members of Congress to get them to sign our statehood bill. The other one is I mounted a very aggressive media campaign to include a DC Statehood TV show, an app, and engage young people at schools. And I went to all over, and I have continued to do that. And of course, the last one is the coalition that I continue to be a member of. I like to join veterans, the LGBTQ plus community and all of the communities that are working statehood. And so I continue to do that.
Thank you so much. Eugene Kinlow, top 3 actions you're most proud of for statehood in the last 2 years.
Well, the work never stops on DC statehood until we are the 51st state. One of the things that I'm most proud of in the last few years is the public awareness campaign that we were able to develop in the Office of Statehood under the Office of Federal and Regional Affairs in the Mayor's Office. So we realized the votes that have occurred in the House, but we have been seeking more support in the Senate. So we have been a part of a public awareness campaign that focused on Arizona and West Virginia and Maine. Now, why Arizona? Why those states? One is because those are states where senators that we hope that would support us did not support us. We'll call it the firm of Manchin, Sinema, and Kelly for West Virginia and Arizona. But our focus was making sure that we got the word out. So we've had a continuous public aware campaigns going out, focusing on target populations like our veterans, students, and others.
Thank you so much. Reverend Wendy, last 2 years worth of actions for statehood that you're most proud of in 1 minute.
The top 3 actions in the last 2 years that I've taken. The first one was becoming a part of the core team with the Hands Off DC. Back in February, when the conservatives made this sort of bold move to try to overturn the laws that we had put in place, that our elected officials had put in place in the conversation around the criminal code, it just was too blatant. So I got involved with Hands Off DC. We went down, we had a rally, we went onto the Hill, we lobbied members in their office to tell them that they needed to keep their hands off DC. We are able and capable of governing ourselves. The second thing was a DC Statehood prayer breakfast that I co-organized with you, the Democratic Caucus. I was very proud of that. It was a big undertaking, but bringing the faith community into the statehood conversation, I believe we have a role to play. I'm also a part of the Faith Leaders for Statehood. And finally, as I mentioned, I'm in the Great Ward 8, there is some confusion for some around statehood. So I've had some conversations that have provided fruit, and those were tangible results for me talking to voters.
Thank you so much. Ankit, last 2 years, top 3 actions for statehood and why? Thank you.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm proud of attending the numerous hearings and rallies and lobby days that have been hosted or that we've organized to try to protect our rights in DC. The past year, especially, Congress has really been coming after us. I've been attending numerous rallies with our Hands Off DC shirts and signs, making it clear to Congress, we're here, we're active, and we're not going to take it anymore. That's number one. Just last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, there was a hearing that I was at. The second thing I'll say is I was part of the team that helped put out all those statehood signs across the city when we had Democratic control of Congress. And I worked with Andria and Jim and many on this call on that. And that was so successful that we actually had, during the hearing on statehood, an opponent of statehood say, look at all these signs they have out there. They can get their message out. Of course, that's ridiculous, but I think it's just a testament to our organizing. And then final thing I'll say is I'm in the process of starting a democracy hub here in DC to organize everybody involved in democracy issues, from statehood to everything out there. And I'm standing that up as part of an inter-movement impact project, and excited to get that going.
Thank you so much, Ankit. Great. Well, now you've gotten like a feel of the pace of the rapid 1 minute. I think you're all doing incredibly well at not going over, better than other candidates I've seen for sure. We're going to switch tack a little bit. So those were questions that we'd sent in advance, so candidates had a little bit of time to prepare. Jim, I see there's a couple of questions in the chat. Did you want to take a stab at asking one of these?
Sure. And we gave you a little bit of advance warning that we might get this question, so I'll ask it. For all candidates, what specifically do you plan to do in your first 30 days in office that will advance DC statehood? And if you need to go out more than 30 days, that's okay too. But just try to give us that answer as best you can. This committee is all about action. We want to see action. So the question again is, what specifically do you plan to do in your first 30 days in office to advance DC statehood?
Okay. And I might be losing track, but I think Eugene Kinlow is up first. Is that right? Yeah, okay.
That's right. All right, that's not a lot of time, but we're going to take every minute. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to start planning a 51st state tour of 51 states. And we're going to start here in the region. We're going to be driving around the country. We're going to be engaging constituents, grassroots and grass tops, to build awareness of DC statehood. What we can also do is work on a celebrity campaign. Most folk, if you look at the following of so many folk, whether it's Beyonce or many of the sports athletes, they have millions of followers. We really need to get them engaged. Americans do not know about our issues. So it's incumbent upon us, as they visit here in Washington, D.C., that we recruit them as they come here to Washington, D.C. to tour, that we engage them, and then that we work with them as they are here and outside of Washington, D.C. So those are at least a couple of things I think we can do.
Thank you so much. Reverend Wendy, first 30 days, what are you going to do?
Well, the first thing that I would start doing on day one, which may take 30 days to organize, is a DC Statehood day-long summit. I'd love to pull together all of the entities here in DC who are working on statehood. There are so many groups doing phenomenal work, but sometimes we're doing it in silos and we run into one another and it's like, oh, you're doing that, and oh, you're doing that. And I think that there is power in numbers. And the more cohesive our message is in DC, the more cohesive message we can carry out to the other states. But I think if we get on one accord here and everyone pulls together, and I think the shadow senator role can lead in that way. I think that that's one of the functions that I was talking about can be brought into the role, pulling all those voices together. When we had that faith leaders statehood breakfast, folks were sitting together at the table like, oh, you do that for state? Oh, I didn't know you were doing that. We need more of that. We've got a lot of good work. We need to pull together, collaborate. I would start organizing that day one.
Thank you so much. Ankit Jain, your plan for the first 30 days in role.
Yeah, well, so I would agree a little bit with Wendy, just put a different spin on it. What we really need is we need to be organized, because if we're not organized, we're not going to succeed. And so what I want to do is make sure that we have the structures in place so that we're all working together. We're all on the same page. Every person has a part to play in this advocacy role, and that we all have the same strategy. We're all reading off the same playbook. Here's how we're going to make it happen. Here's what DC Vote can do. Here's what the DC Dems can do. Here's what the council can do, and making sure we have the structures in place so that we can have those conversations on a regular basis. So that's number one. The number two thing is building relationships with the people who are going to make or break our efforts. And that's both on the Hill and also outside of the Hill. So on the Hill, I already am connected with many staff members on the Hill, with several members of Congress, especially from the Virginia delegation. And I would like to build those relationships so that they have a face to put on this. And then build relationships with people like Brennan Center and some of the big democracy organizations that have membership in the states where we need to influence these senators, and make sure that they are pushing our issues for us.
Thank you. Franklin Garcia, your first 30 days, tell us more.
It's the same approach I took when I started my shadow representative. I'm going to have an outreach, a legislative outreach. I'm going to structure a way to visit members of the Senate consistently and include, whenever possible, outreach efforts to state legislators seeking support for DC statehood. I'm going to make sure that we target states and legislators to introduce this statehood legislation. I'm then also going to seek support from the community. I'm going to help strengthen groups who need support in their outreach effort, including paying visits to local colleges, ANCs, civic associations, churches, and other groups to see how they can get involved. And lastly, I'm going to have a robust media campaign to include bringing back the DC Statehood Today show, social media to engage young people, and an international outreach.
Thank you so much, Franklin. I just want to reflect and say that I really love the depth and also the variety of answers that we're getting. Part of the role of a candidate forum is both to educate, but also to help voters be educated themselves in what the candidates represent. And so if everybody had the same answer, it'd be like, well, now who do I vote for? But I think we're hearing some good diversity of answers, everybody with the same goal towards statehood, but maybe different approaches. Including, honestly, some very ambitious plans for 30 days. And so let's take that a little bit further with one of the questions that's also in the chat.
Right. So let me ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a question that's appeared in the chat. It's a question, again, for all of the candidates. This person has heard that the current shadow senators express frustration with lack of resources and lack of respect from people on the Hill when they try to engage in advocacy. How do you plan to overcome these obstacles to provide effective representation for the citizens of DC?
And just before we kick off, I want to add a little bit of context from our last monthly call. We talked about how much money is in the DC government budget for statehood. The shadow delegation budget is roughly $250,000. The shadow delegates themselves are all unpaid. That money is for office staffing. We learned that there is maybe $300,000 in a fund which is not currently being allocated due to but it's funded from a checkbox on tax forms that you can choose to fund statehood. And so we're not talking about millions of dollars available. So this question of frustration about lack of resources, just wanted to put a point on like exactly how much we're talking about in resources today. So the question is, how will you overcome obstacles like this in the role to provide effective representation? I believe, Wendy, we're starting first with you. Am I remembering correctly? Or is it Ankit now? Sorry, Ankit, my fault. I'm losing track.
Is it me or is it you, Wendy?
Wendy.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, I thought.
wait.
Okay, I don't remember. I've lost track as well.
Right, too late. Wendy said no, so Ankit, it's your turn.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I think this is a very good question. I really appreciate it. So I think there's two aspects to this. It's kind of the getting the resources, which I see is more going to the DC Council side, and then it's using getting the respect we deserve from the Congress side. So I'll start with the council. We have some funding for the position. I don't think it's enough. I think if we really care about statehood, we need to fund the people who are our main advocates of statehood effectively. And I'm not even talking about salary or anything like that. I'm talking about the office itself. Like, we need to have the staff and the staff time that we deserve. And so that involves having the right relationships with members of the council and being able to legislate, lobby, and advocate for the office. And that's what I will do. I'm already, connected with members of the council, and they know who I am, and I think I can make that argument. On the Congress side, I have relationships with several members, like I said, and staff. So I'm going to lean on those to try to get in and start my advocacy. And then, like I said, we need to also have people advocating on our behalf who members of Congress listen to. People like the National League of Women Voters, people like the Brennan Center. We need them to be our advocates as well. And I will focus on that, having those meetings with outside people.
Thank you so much, Ankit. Franklin Garcia, how will you help provide effective representation given lack of resources and, respect?
Yeah, the lack of resources is a legacy position that stands back in the day when the positions were even prohibited from being funded. And so now we have a little bit of money, which is good. And that's why you see that when I mentioned that I had a structured way of visiting all members of Congress, I set a time when I could do this, and with the support of my employer, I was able to do that. They even allowed me to work in DC so that I could make those visits, and those became very effective. And so I think you just have to work with what you have right now and continue to advocate and lobby so that we can, at the city council, get more funding. In terms of the going on the Hill and not being respected, I found a lot of that mainly with the Republicans member of Congress. And so that's something that's going to happen. At some point, you don't even get an appointment with them. I made appointments 3 times a week with members of Congress. And every time I reach out to a member of the Republican Party, they would reject. And even meeting with staff, they would avoid me. So I would just say we need to continue in spite of what we see.
Thank you so much. Eugene Kinlow, effective representation for statehood with insufficient resources. Your take.
All right, well, we're the little train that could. So we need to keep just working and being a little bit more effective in the work that we do. Relationships matter. But let me start with the resource question. An effective national campaign is going to take some money, whether it's raised external to the government or not. And I imagine we're going to need in excess of several $1 million to penetrate the nations. So we're on both coasts in the middle. So we're going to need some money, and we're going to need to figure out how to raise that money, and then we're going to need to figure out how the city supports that effort. But what we can do here in the city, we've got places, the Democratic Club, you've got the Capitol Hill Club. Those are places that we should be using to great effect right here and right now. I'm a member of the Democratic Club. I go to the Republican Club. There are people that we have to do business with, and that's where they go. You want to go to their office, they don't want to meet with you? Well, guess what? You need to go where they're having lunch, breakfast, and we need to have events there so that the audience has been captured.
Thank you so much. Reverend Wendy, effective representation with insufficient resources to advance statehood. Tell us more.
Ooh, insufficient resources sounds like a single motherhood, something I'm very familiar with. And one thing women know how to do is work that purse. And we know how to work and make $1 out of 15 cents. I think that's how it goes. And so for me, having the resources provided to us would be very important. But until we get to that place, and while we're working on that place, how can we be more effective and efficient with the dollars that we do have? Because I do believe that there, are things that can be achieved. We can have small wins build up into big wins. And when it gets to the place where we talk about respect, respect is not given, it is earned. And it is earned through building relationships, through reaching out, through talking with people, inviting them over to your space, going to theirs. I reached out to the shadow senator for Puerto Rico and just gave her a call and introduced myself as a candidate. She was so grateful. She was like, let's have coffee. We got together and she was just sharing ideas and tips with me. That's the type of outreach I would bring to the role.
You're on.
I'm on mute. What a rookie error. So building off of that and going back to our prepared questions. So one of the things you can think about with insufficient resources is leveraging the help of partners. Name the top 2 or 3 partners you intend to work with in promoting statehood, and how can the Democratic Party of the District of Columbia help you in your statehood, in our collective statehood goal? I believe, Franklin, you are up this time, unless I've lost track again. 1 minute.
Yes, I think that we have a lot of partners that we can work with. I think embassies are very good partners. I was able to work the embassies, and I remember the embassy of Cuba. I even helped range DC Washingtonians going to Cuba, and at some point they reached out to me so that I could help them do some legislation at the city council. So I think the international community is an important partner here. I think the Democratic Party, ultimately the biggest threat for statehood is the Republican Party and Donald Trump. And so I think that that's why you have a petition that I'm signing to declare Donald Trump a persona non grata in DC. We need to sign it, and we need to do another rally in downtown to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't come out here. That's the biggest threat we have. And so I think that the Democratic Party is key. We have the Democratic Party that has resources and that has connections and influence, and we need to utilize that. I think that the DC Statehood PAC that was formed about 2 years ago is also key in this process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Eugene, I think you're up next. I think I switched up the order again. That's my fault. The question is the top 2 to 3 partners you intend to work with in promoting statehood. Thoughts on whether the DC Democratic Party is in that or not. But what is your relationship with those partners today?
All right. Well, I've got great relationships with the folk I'm going to mention. The first is the Democratic Party. Last year, when we had a challenge communicating with Senator Manchin, we realized that maybe he would listen to some folk from his own party. So working with the Democratic State Committee, working with your chair, Charles Wilson, we reached out to the co-chair of the Democratic Party in West Virginia. She ended up putting a piece, an op-ed, and indicating her support for DC state voting rights and statehood. That's the sort of connectivity that the DC Democratic State Committee has been able to provide through the DNC. So we're going to we need to continue to do that and do it all over the country. Another group that's very effective is a leadership conference on civil and human rights. We've been able to work with them, large, broad-based organization, 200 organizations that are part of them. They have folk on the ground, and they've got great access to elected officials. In addition to that, the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Mayors are in every city and every state. We need to be able to connect with them. They come to Washington, D.C. every year. We need to go to them.
Thank you so much. Reverend Wendy, top 3 partners that you would partner with on statehood, Democratic Party or not, and your relationship with them.
Well, I would definitely work within the Democratic parties, especially with your caucus in particular, or the DC Statehood Caucus. I think we work well together in terms of our mission of spreading the message of statehood and bringing other groups, particularly local groups, together. So I would continue that work. I would also continue working with DC Vote. DC Vote has led the charge here in the city for many, many years on the work of statehood around the country. I was a board member there until I ran for office, so I had to step down from the board. But being a board member there and helping to make sure that we are continuing the great work that DC Vote does, and then League of Women Voters, just doing amazing, incredible work around the country, but specifically here in the city. The last time they presented at that Statehood Faith Breakfast, they talked about work they're doing with returning citizens. And we all know that the lack of statehood has an impact on our criminal justice here system locally. So those are the three I would continue to work with.
Thank you so much. And to round out this question, Ankit, top 2 to 3 partners, Democratic Party or not, and your relationship with them in order to advance statehood.
Yeah, so definitely the DC Democrats in this committee. I think there's so many different orgs within DC that are doing this fight. DC Vote is another, Neighbors United for Statehood is another. So I would want to work very closely with them. Like I mentioned, we need to all get on the same page. Every single org has a different strength, and I want to make sure everybody's using those strengths so that we're greater than the sum of our parts. So that would be one of the main organizations I want to work with. The second is with members of Congress, and specifically with our delegate to the House and the Virginia and Maryland delegations in Congress. Our delegate to the House, she is our strongest advocate for statehood, and I would want to make sure that this office and I am working in close coordination with her. So things she's pushing on the House side, I'm pushing on the Senate side, and vice versa. And then our members of the Virginia and Maryland delegation, I've already mentioned, I have relationships with several of them in the Virginia side especially. They are affected by many of the same issues we're affected by in DC. They can be our strongest advocates because they actually do have that vote. And so I'd want to work with them so they are advocating for DC before Congress.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to shift it a little bit over to Congress and what it takes to advance statehood with the Congress that we have today. The main vehicle for DC statehood is the Washington, D.C. Admissions Act, which passed the House twice and has had a hearing in the Senate. What do you believe is necessary to move it forward in the Senate so that the president can sign it? And we've touched on this before, but I want to get really more specific. What will you do? What will you do? What will you do as part of the shadow delegation? What actions will you take? There was a call out in the comments that this is a 100% volunteer role. So when we talk about what you're going to do, let's also layer in how much time are you realistically going to be able to commit to doing this in order to influence Congress? I have once again forgotten who started. I think Eugene is up again, right? It's Eugene who's first. Okay, nobody's nodding their head.
I'll take it.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, so if you could restate just that question again, I think.
Oh yeah.
The question before that.
Of course. The question is, the layout in Congress right now is the bill has passed the House twice and has had a hearing in the Senate. What do you believe is necessary to move it forward in the Senate? And what specifically will your role be, acknowledging likely personal constraints because this is a volunteer role? What are you going to do to advance it in the Senate?
All right, so let's just start with the House. It's passed the House twice, as you've indicated. The first step is to make sure that party politics works and that it matters. We can't get a successful vote in the House if we don't control the House. So we need to make sure that the party is strong and supports this and understands it. Something's going to happen this summer that will help most Americans and most Democrats particularly understand our position, and it's going to be the conventions. We need to make sure that not only it will be in the platform as it was 4 years ago, but we need to make that live. So, and that's one of the ways that we can make sure that most of the Democrats are on board, whether it's in the House and the Senate. Now, almost any presidential candidate from the Democratic Party will support a DC statehood, but right now it just comes down to making sure that those parties win and that they've got the numbers to succeed. And if they succeed, then we succeed.
Thank you so much. Reverend Wendy, what will you do to advance it in the Senate or have a different strategy for advancing it in Congress, recognizing that this is a volunteer role?
Very much so. And, I appreciate that being pointed out. It is a volunteer position. So you do have to be mindful about the time that you contribute to it. And so it would need to be focused effort. And so for me, and you're saying moving it through the Senate, what I think about is the fact that one of our champions in the Senate, you know, the House Bill H-51, of course, our warrior, Eleanor Holmes Norton got that through the House. The matching bill in the Senate, S-51, was sponsored by Senator Tom Carper of Delaware, who is retiring. So my question was, who's going to pick up the mantle for us in the Senate and be that voice? And so that's where I would start, finding out who's going to be the next Senate champion, maybe reaching out to Senator Tom Carper's office, you know, building out relationships. He's endorsed a lovely lady to, you know, replace him. But in the meantime, who is our point of contact? I would start there, building out that relationship so that that ball doesn't drop should we get the bill moving again.
Thank you so much. Ankit, you are up next. Your strategy for advancing statehood in the Senate or in Congress overall, and how you will do it in a volunteer role.
Yeah, I mean, so I've thought about this a lot. I would love to work with Republicans to support statehood. I think realistically, it's going to be tough. So it's much more likely to advance when Democrats have control of government. But I'm confident that'll happen in the near to medium term future, maybe even next year. And so the question then becomes with the Senate, it's always the filibuster. How do we get around the filibuster, which takes 60 votes to overcome? Well, first of all, I would want to get the statehood in the big pro-voting bill that Democrats have been pushing. They tried really hard to get that bill passed through Congress last session. I would want to get statehood in that bill because what is a bigger voting rights issue than 700,000 tax-paying Americans not having the right to vote? So if we get that log rolled into that big bill, then we've got to get an exception to the filibuster. Now, it only takes 50 votes to create an exception to the filibuster. We are going to have a more progressive caucus next Senate because the two conservative Democrats who oppose statehood, they're retiring. And so I would like to get an exception to the filibuster. Democrats came really close last Congress. They tried and they almost got it. We're going to have a more progressive Senate next cycle. Let's do the same thing. And we're going to succeed this time and get it passed into law.
Thank you so much. And Franklin Garcia, your strategy for advancing it in the Senate or more broadly in Congress, given limitations. You did touch on this already in a prior answer. I'd ask you to provide additional detail than what you said before.
Thank you so much. And that's right. You're going to hear basically a lot of the same approach because I think it worked for me and I'm intending in doing it again. We have to realize that unfortunately, Democrats are tied to statehood. I mean, statehood is going to happen with the help and support of Democrats, and that's how it is, unfortunately. And I tried very, very hard and went very far to almost get 2 Republicans to side with me, 2 Hispanic members of Congress, but it didn't happen. So I don't see that happening. So the structure has got to be the same. It's got to be one where you attack the legislative part. Second, you have to continue to build up the community outreach. And thirdly, you got to have that media exposure. You know, that's how it is. So I talked about how I organized meetings with civic associations, with ANCs, churches, everybody, and I visit them constantly. That's why my schedule was super busy when I was the rep. That's what you do. And you continue to visit those members of Congress or the states where they're from. That's basically what you need to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, before I ask the next question, I want to make sure I know who's next up. So Wendy, I think it's your turn again. Okay. The next question, staying on this congressional theme, and then I think we're going to move to maybe like a couple of quick questions, like lightning round, and a closing statement, because we're at 11 minutes till the end of the forum. The next question, how serious do you believe the Republicans are in repealing home rule? They're introducing a ton of riders. There has been a bill, I think, explicitly introduced that's like no more home rule for DC. How serious do you think they are? How serious do you think they are? And what will you do in the face of increased anti-DC action? Reverend Wendy.
And let me add to that something. There have been riders in the past in connection with the appropriations bill that seek to limit the funding that DC can use to influence Congress. They call it propaganda. And what will you do? How will you get around that in getting your message to Congress?
Thank you. Reverend Wendy, 1 minute.
Thank you. I'll continue to do what I've been doing, and that's take my message directly to the people who are trying to overturn home rule. Sometimes you have to communicate with people in the language in which they are trying to communicate with us. I don't think that they would hesitate for a second to overturn home rule if they could. I think they're very serious about what they're attempting to do, and their continued attempts to add on these riders only confirms that. And so what we have to do, and that's part of what drove Hands Off DC downtown into offices, protesting, getting arrested, is because we need to get their attention to let them know that we're not just going to idly stand by and allow them to run roughshod over DC and DC residents. So I would organize, I would activate the city to get involved as well. We need the people down there speaking out. And I would like to see a congressional statehood caucus form. I would like to have a caucus of people, both on the House and the Senate side, come together so that we're not out there by ourselves, because this is an American issue.
Thank you so much, Reverend Wendy. Ankit, how serious are the Republicans about their anti-DC actions, and what will you do if elected?
Yeah, I mean, so Donald Trump keeps on saying he's going to do a federal takeover of DC if he's elected. And you have some MAGA Republicans who have already introduced a bill to end home rule. So I take them seriously and literally. I think they will try to do it if they get full control. And so how are we going to stop them? I think it's a two-pronged strategy. You got to play the outside game and the inside game. Wendy mentioned Hands Off DC. We need to have strong presence and show that people of DC are paying attention, and you're not going to be able to just sneak this right by us. But then we also have to have the inside game. We need to play a little bit of real politics here, speak to them on their own terms, not the terms that we wish that we wish they cared about. It's like you talk to them. Do you really want to be making zoning laws for DC? Do you really want to be deciding liquor licenses and traffic laws and what the criminal penalties are for like assault, a second-degree assault? And point out to them, here's all the bad things that will happen to you if you support DC ending DC home rule, and really making the argument on their terms, which I think we failed to do a little bit in the past, especially with the criminal code reform debacle. And when we speak on their terms, that's when we succeed. We got to listen to what moves them.
Thank you so much, Franklin Garcia. How serious are the Republicans about anti-DC action, and what will you do?
Yeah, and I agree with everything that's been said, and I think that you should take them for serious. But let me tell you how serious it is. When I was shadow representative, the member of Congress from Puerto Rico reached out to me, who happens to be a Republican. Gonzalez Colon is her name, the resident commissioner. She reached out to me because Puerto Rico was considering implementing the Tennessee plan, and we had just gone through a very successful revitalizing of the Tennessee plan here in DC. And I worked with her and provided all the documentation that we used through the entire process. And would you believe that we support statehood for Puerto Rico, and our congresswoman signs up for her bill, but or supports her bill, but then she wouldn't support our bill. And so you can tell that even after doing all that and working with her so much, and she understands our plight, just like she is trying to reach, do the same thing, and she wouldn't join us. And so you can see how challenging it is for us to work with Republicans.
Thank you so much. Eugene Kinlow, seriousness of anti-DC actions and what you will do.
Well, the folk are acting like they're serious, Republicans on Capitol Hill, but they are not. If you look at the amount of legislation that has been passed in this Congress, it is at a low watermark. So this is a distraction, and one that they think they can get away with. I think that clearly they probably have enough votes in the House to succeed. I don't think it will succeed in the Senate, but we should be prepared and continue to fight, because where we are right now is in a very interesting place. People do not remember that 20 years ago, we could not spend any money to advance our own position. We couldn't spend any advocacy dollars. It was considered lobbying. And where we are right now is in a very relaxed position. Now, the pendulum perhaps is swinging the other way. President Trump has indicated that he's indicated his dislike for Washington, D.C. and the values that we hold. The biggest way that we can advocate and stand up is to make sure that we vote, we turn out, and we tie our issue into other national issues to get our issues aligned with them.
Thank you so much. We're going to move to closing statements. I just thought of a random sort of like free-for-all question that we could ask. So everybody can go off of mute, a little bit of a quick round for like a minute. I'm curious, like everybody who was on this call has made the ballot. which means that you have gotten several thousand signatures on a petition, and have talked to so many voters about statehood. Free for all. Strangest question that you've got about statehood. Shout it out.
Okay, I got a good one. Someone asked me if I would support the secession of part of Oregon as in exchange for DC statehood. And I was like, I've never thought about that before, because there's apparently a movement for I think it was Idaho, sorry, Greater Idaho movement.
Okay.
So yeah,
Greater Idaho and statehood. Had not heard that one either. Anybody else?
Gosh, strange
No? Okay. How about,
question.
if there's not a strange one, what about your worst petition signature gathering moment?
Well, let me say that Mark Plotkin, who's no longer with us, used to say the biggest objection to statehood was that it would mess up our flag.
Oh yeah, I've heard that one a lot. I have that slide that has 3 different flags with 3 different numbers of stars, and I asked them to pick out the one that has 50. Nobody ever gets it right.
But then DC Vote came out with their own flag with 51 stars, and the mayor displayed it on Pennsylvania Avenue. So, and it didn't look that bad.
Okay. If you think of any other strange ones, send them through my way after the call. Happy to share them out in the newsletter. But for now, let's go and do some closing statements. I think we'll start with Ankit. Oh, sorry. Were you about to say something?
Well, you did ask about the worst petition
worst
circulating circumstance.
Yeah.
It was so cold at the MLK parade this year that the pens stopped working as we were walking alongside people on the parade route trying to get signatures, and the signatures were bleeding down the pen. No, it's going to be illegible. Oh my God. So
Okay.
that was an interesting experience. Thank God for my team, I tell you.
Duly noted. Bring the NASA space pens next time. You need some space technology for the cold days in DC. Ankit, we're going to start closing statements with you. Why should DC Democratic voters vote for you on June 4th?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank Andria and Jim and everybody else who organized this, and all the people on this chat who've been part of the statehood movement. I saw Kelsey there, so I Noah there, Carol, so many people. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I am doing this because I truly believe in democracy. I'm a voting rights attorney. I work on promoting democratic reform in my day job, and I truly believe in my heart that the people know what's best for us, and that we are the ones who will solve our problems for ourselves. And I don't take democracy for granted. My parents came to the US from India as immigrants, and my dad had to sleep outside his local immigration office overnight to get his green card and get on the pathway to a vote. And he worked too hard to see his son lose the right to vote just because he decided to cross the river from Fairfax into DC. And so I'm fighting for everybody in DC to have the right to vote. And I have the vision for what this position can do. And I have the experience in legislative advocacy, and then I have the fresh perspective to get statehood accomplished and to stop Congress from taking away our rights. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Ankit. Franklin Garcia, why should DC Democratic voters vote for you?
Yeah, and so my name is Franklin. I've been fighting for this for a very, very long time. I have a structured way, which I've outlined a few times here tonight. You can also visit my program or the way I will approach statehood at my website, franklinforussenate.com. I think that we need to continue to fight for this, because I know that it looks difficult now for us because of the Republican control of the House. But this is the time when we get in and we get ready for when that moment comes in, and we're going to make it. And so I intend on getting the coalitions together that I've always worked with to make sure that we have a strong advocacy for statehood. I plan on having a very structured program, visiting members of the Senate. I know we don't have that many to visit because not only are we limited by having 100, but then some of them, the Republicans won't even allow us to visit them. But I have a structured way to visit everyone and continue to visit the state legislator. That's how we're going to get statehood.
Thank you so much, Franklin. Eugene Kinlow, why should DC Democratic voters vote for you?
Okay, this is a serious issue, and we're going to need a serious person. We're going to need a person who's dedicated and who's dedicated their time, their talent, their energy, their networks, their life to this issue. Over the last 20 years, I've been a part of every significant effort to move this city forward and to educate and advocate the nation about this issue, whether it was the largest protest that occurred on this issue back in 2007, working with DC Vote, we organized it, or whether it was the largest civil protest of arrest of DC residents in 2011, on April 11th, 2011, I was there and helped make that happen. So we have been a part of, I have been a part of a movement trying to advocate and move the Washington, D.C. forward. We need a serious person. I am that person. I'm asking people to vote on my experience, my dedication, my commitment, my networks, my fire. Vote and elect Eugene Kinlow, U.S. Senate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Reverend Wendy, why should DC Democratic voters vote for you?
Because I hope you've seen my heart tonight, and I hope you see that it is for the people and the residents of DC. And I think that we deserve some fresh eyes and some fresh energy and some fresh passion toward this particular issue. With all due respect to the gentleman who has spoken tonight about their years of service in this movement, it has brought us to where we are. Now, I think torches need to be passed so that those of us who are in it now and can see from a different perspective and bring that different energy to the table be given an opportunity. I know we talk about the need for DC statehood now, and that's true. But with the recent developments in our country, overturning of Roe, January 6th, affirmative action, and the blatant attempts by Congress to intervene in DC affairs, I believe there's a fierce urgency to this now that I believe we need to acknowledge. As a DC resident, a woman, and a Black woman in particular, the quest for DC statehood is personal. And we're on the cusp of a seismic shift in our history. I want to be a part of that, and I'll do it dutifully. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And honestly, a huge heartfelt thank you to all four of these candidates who have made the time available to join us, who have been so prepared and eloquent with all of their responses. And I hope others feel as I do, that we've actually seen some differentiation in their approaches to statehood. So I hope this was valuable for people who are thinking about making their voting decision on June 4th.
And
Jim?
I want to thank our candidates for appearing. All of you are experienced. You've all been down this road before, and you had an opportunity to prepare for this program, and your answers are very comprehensive and very detailed. So we thank you for your seriousness and for your efforts at running for this race and raising the profile of this race. We know this race is not cheap to run. You don't have public financing to rely on. Many of you are spending money out of your own pockets and asking close friends and relatives and others for contributions. We in the city are very grateful to you, and all DC residents are very grateful to you for taking on this challenge. So thank you. Whatever happens in this race, thank you very much for stepping up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful.
Okay, I'm going to stop this recording.